You'll find the various inks that you can apply to your sprites quite useful, starting from copy all the way down to lighten in this drop-down menu. So let me review each of these inks and go over a short definition of each one in this movie. Copy is a default and is the one that you'll probably use the most. It uses the least system resources, so if you're going to be animating sprites, you'll want to set the ink to copy, at least while the sprites are animating. With copy, all colors, including white, are opaque unless the image contains alpha channel effects or transparencies. Copy is useful for backgrounds or for sprites that don't appear in front of other artwork. If the cast member is not regular, a white box appears around the sprite when it passes in front of another sprite or appears on a non-white background like I have here. Notice I have a trim on this sprite. To get rid of that trim so that it composites against the colored background better, you want to use either the matte ink or the background transparent. Preferably you want to use the matte ink unless that doesn't give you the results you want. Matte uses a little less system resources than background transparent. Should point out another interesting thing about background transparent is if you choose background transparent and both the foreground and background color chips are set to the same color, that sprite will disappear. This is very useful for invisible buttons or invisible interactive areas that you want to add lingo script to. Next you've got transparent. Transparent makes all light colors transparent so you can see lighter objects beneath the sprite. Interesting effect here on this image since my background is gray. If I change the background to a white color, the transparent effect looks quite different. Next after transparent is reverse. Reverse reverses overlapping colors. When applied to the foreground sprite where colors overlap, the upper color changes to the chromatic or opposite based on the color palette currently in use of the color beneath it. So this might be more useful if I drag out another sprite here and then set that sprite underneath. Notice that I get some different effects here because the reverse reverses overlapping colors. Next is Ghost. Ghost, like reverse, reverses overlapping colors, except non-overlapping colors are transparent. Notice that everything went transparent. And now I can take my sprite underneath. Kind of like a mask effect, very interesting. Not copy, reverses all the colors in an image to create a chromatic negative of the original. Like so. The next three inks, not transparent, not reverse, and not ghost, are all variations of other effects. The foreground image is first reversed and then the copy, transparent, reverse, or ghost ink is applied. These inks are great for creating weird effects. So again, you'll see this best when you have a darker or lighter sprite underneath the sprite that has the ink attached to it. So there's not ghost, here's not reverse, and here is not transparent. Interesting effects. Next we have blend. The blend ink ensures that the same sprite uses the color blend percentage that is specified on the Sprite tab in the Property Inspector. That'll be right here. Percent, blend. Notice that at 0% it disappears. At 100% it's full opacity, and at 50% semi-transparent. Next we have darkest. The darkest compares the RGB color pixels in the foreground and background and uses the darkest pixel color. I don't see much difference in this particular sprite. Let's try this opaque. Not much difference there. Lightest compares the RGB pixels in the foreground and background and uses the lightest pixel color. Again, I don't see much difference there. Add, which is next, creates a new color that is a result of adding the RGB color value of the foreground sprite to the color value of the background sprite. If the value of the two colors exceed the maximum RGB color value, which is 255, director subtracts 256 from the remaining value, so the result is between 0 and 255. Get another interesting effect there with a sprite underneath. My sprite with the add ink added to it. Next we have add pin. Add pin is very similar to add. The foreground sprite's RGB color is added to the background sprite's RGB color value, but the color value is not allowed to exceed 255. If the value of the new color does exceed 255, the value is reduced to 255. Let's try this with a different color sprite in the background there. And again, I don't see much difference with this add pin. Sometimes you can also try it on a photograph, and that will give you different effects. That's kind of interesting. So if you experiment with these inks and you're finding that a particular ink doesn't do much, try a different type of cast member. Subtract is next. This subtracts the RGB color value of the foreground sprite's color from the RGB value of the background sprite's color to determine a new color. Interesting effects here. Again, you'll notice that by overlapping your sprites, you'll get some very interesting effects with these inks. Next is subtract pin. This ink subtracts the RGB color value of pixels in the foreground sprite from the value of the background sprite. The value of the new color is not allowed to be less than 0. If the value of the new color is negative, the value will be set to 0. So in this case, looks like I don't really need anything underneath this sprite to change the effect of that ink. The last two inks, lighten and darken, are particularly useful for animating unusual color effects. So let me now move on to the next movie and review these last two inks in more detail.